At this point, we want to bring in Candida Moss. She is a CBS News papal contributor and Edward Cadbury Professor of Theology at the University of Birmingham.
Thank you very much. Okay.
In the UK. Joining us here from New York. Good morning to you. You know, Pope Francis was considered a breath of fresh air for some and thought to be a more progressive church leader than the Catholic Church had experience with those abiding by tradition. But he did oppose allowing women to become priests or deacons. How might that aspect of his legacy color how he's viewed overall?
Good morning. Yes, it's a great question. You know, when it comes to women in the church, certainly Francis doesn't seem to have been the progressive that he was on, say, issues of LGBT inclusion or divorced and remarried Catholics. He did set up a commission to think about women's ordination and about women as deacons, but it didn't actually come to fruition. And this is one of the places where progressive Catholics have felt disappointed by Pope Francis and wish that he had pushed further and sort of more decisively in the direction of including women.
On that point, an earlier guest shared with us that with more than 1.3 billion Catholics around the world, it's exceedingly challenging to change any policy, especially with an institution steeped in tradition, and also considering that when it comes to those from the African continent or other places, they may be more resistant to elevating women or the issues faced by those who are LGBTQ+. Help us understand that, because while you note that progressives were frustrated that Pope Francis didn't do more, it's not necessarily an easy thing for any pope to do.
That is exactly right. It is very hard to unite a global church around change. And I said that progressives were frustrated with Francis. Conservatives were frustrated by Francis as well. Right. And many accuse him of confusing the Catholic faithful, particularly when it comes to African cardinals. African Catholicism tends to be quite socially conservative on issues of abortion, women's rights, gender roles, women's ordination, LGBT inclusion, and other issues. And so when it comes to African cardinals, certainly they have been very worried by Pope Francis and were particularly resistant to his efforts to get the African cardinals to stand in solidarity with LGBT Catholics. So it is very challenging for Pope Francis. And one of the big changes that he made was he appointed a lot of cardinals from around the world. And so whomever the next pope ends up being, it will have to be a pope who speaks to the needs of a global church.
And we've also been told so far that it's effectively impossible to predict who the next pope might be. John Allen had an interesting phrase in saying that you often follow a fat pope with a thin one, simply saying that Catholics typically vote for some type of change from pope to pope. But 80% of those who will be voting for this new pope were appointed by Pope Francis. So what might we expect from what comes next from the church?
That's exactly right. Francis has appointed the majority of cardinals in the College of Cardinals. So John Allen is correct. We should think of conclave in a way as a referendum on Pope Francis himself. And there will be certain issues that will come to the forefront. For example, how to think about the legacy of sex abuse in the church, issues of immigration and poverty. There are different issues that preoccupy different sort of geographical regions of the church. In Europe and North America, the church worries a lot about the sort of lack of church attendance and diminishing numbers of vocations for priests. So there they have a particular set of concerns. In South America, in Africa, in Asia, people are more concerned with issues of immigration, of poverty. They're not so worried about church attendance. And so when we think about who the next pope will be, because of the way that Pope Francis has built the College of Cardinals, we have to acknowledge that we can no longer have a pope who just speaks for European concerns. Whomever gets elected will have to win votes from popes, from cardinals in Asia, in Africa, in South America. And that means that we're going to be looking at a future pope who represents a much bigger percentage of Catholics and Catholic interests.
Which is quite a fascinating statement to make. It's almost remarkable that anything gets agreed upon, considering the varied interests of this church, which spans the globe and has more than 1.3 billion people. Help us understand then how this process will work. We know that over the next 9 days, you have this period of mourning, that just acknowledging the passing of Pope Francis. But then what? Because we're also told that these cardinals will be heading to Rome, meeting each other for the first time, getting to know each other and going through these rounds and rounds of voting until there's consensus. So just give us a sense, kind of behind the scenes, of what will happen here in these next few weeks.
Well, so right now, as you said, the focus is on mourning, and it's very frowned upon to be campaigning during this period. But cardinals will have been thinking about the next pope, particularly during Pope Francis's long illness in February and March. So they aren't coming into conclave with no idea of who they're voting for. So frontrunners will emerge very quickly. There will be about 4 or 5 names who represent different constituencies who will emerge in the first vote. And after that, we'll see sort of allegiances form. Those will form along language lines, everyone who speaks Spanish or English or French. They will sit together at meals during conclave, and that's sort of one way of forming alliances. There are also sort of interest groups who will sort of align with one another in conclave. And as conclave proceeds, as subsequent votes take place, we will see a kind of narrowing of the pool. There actually are rules in place now that were put in place by John Paul II and by Benedict to sort of limit how long conclave can actually go on for. After a certain point, they can only vote for the 2 frontrunners, and it's only once a sort of a majority of 2/3 emerges that we have a new pope. So there will be a lot of politicking behind the scenes during conclave, but that won't happen until conclave formally starts.
And from your perspective, in our last few seconds, what will Pope Francis be remembered for the most?
I think Pope Francis will be remembered for his personal charisma, for his character, for his dedication to the people, his humility, and the way in which he always led with love and hope.
Candida Moss, great to chat with you. We appreciate you joining us today. Thanks for your time.